My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. It is a title I worked hard for. A doctorate in geomatics with a post-doctoral specialization in remote ecological surveying. For the past 7 years, I have been employed by letsread Geomatics, a firm that occupies a very specific, very lucrative niche in the corporate world. We provide comprehensive environmental impact assessments for clients with sensitive, high-value projects. In layman's terms, we soon discovered why. When a corporation with a name you would recognize wants to build something in a place they'd rather you not know about, they call us. My work is a blend of high technology and rugged fieldwork. It involves analyzing multispectral satellite imagery, processing vast amounts of geographical data through GIS software, and then validating that data on the ground, often in the most isolated locations on the planet. My standard deployment kit is a testament to the precision my work demands. It includes a Trimble Prox GPS unit for sub-meter positional accuracy, a portable YSI multi-parameter probe for real-time water quality analysis, and for high-stakes topographical mapping, a Leica total station that can measure angles with an accuracy of 3 seconds. For penetrating dense forest canopies, which is often the case, I utilize a drone equipped with a state-of-the-art LiDAR system. I am a scientist. My world is one of quantifiable data, verifiable facts, and detailed, objective reports. I deal in numbers and sensor readings, not superstition. It is a mindset that has served me well. From the unstable volcanic fields of the Congo to the thawing permafrost of Siberia. This is why, when the contract for Isla Perdita came across my desk, I viewed it through the same dispassionate lens. The assignment was straightforward, if unusually classified, a 3-month solo survey of a newly charted, privately owned island in a remote stretch of the Pacific Ocean. The client, shielded behind the usual layers of corporate anonymity, required a comprehensive biodiversity and geological assessment prior to exploring development potential. The pay was astronomical, even by letsread standards, and the non-disclosure agreement was thicker than my doctoral thesis. These were flags, certainly, but not ones I hadn't seen before. In my line of work, secrecy is currency. I signed the contract, packed my gear, and prepared for 3 months of professional solitude. The journey ended with a helicopter drop-off, the rhythmic thumping of the rotors fading into an oppressive silence. That was my first true impression of the island. It was a silence that felt profound, unnatural. Most wild places have a voice, the buzz of insects, the call of birds, the rustle of wind through leaves. Isla Perdita was muted, as if holding its breath. I stood on the black volcanic sand of the beach, watching the helicopter shrink to a speck on the horizon, feeling an acute sense of isolation that was both familiar and, in this place, uniquely unsettling. My initial survey of the immediate area revealed an ecosystem that was, for lack of a better term, bizarre. As a biologist by training, I recognized features that were scientifically fascinating yet deeply wrong. Many of the woody shrubs exhibited extreme, divaricate branching, a dense, tangled network of wide, angled, interlacing branches with small, sparse leaves. It's an evolutionary defense mechanism. typically developed in response to browsing by large, flightless birds like the moa of New Zealand. But there were no such animals here. There shouldn't have been for millennia. It was a defense against a ghost. The flora also displayed startling examples of island gigantism. Ferns with thick, leathery fronds stood as tall as a man. The trees were unlike any I had catalogued before, their trunks swollen and pale. Storing water like the desert, dwelling bottle trees of Socotra, despite the humid, tropical climate. The air was heavy and cloying, thick with the scent of damp soil, rotting vegetation, and something else I couldn't place. A faint, metallic sweetness, like old blood and ozone. I established my base of operations, a pre-fabricated habitat module, air, dropped with my gear. It was a self-contained unit, complete with an atmospheric reclamation unit for water, solar power, and a satellite uplink for data transfer. As I initiated the startup sequence, my instruments began their preliminary scans. That's when I first detected the hum. It was a persistent, low-frequency vibration, registering on my equipment at just below 20 AC, on the very threshold of human hearing. I made a note in my log. Potential geological source, possibly subterranean water flow or unusual atmospheric resonance. Subjects exposed to similar frequencies have reported feelings of unease or anxiety. I could already feel it myself. Slight, unnerving pressure in my ears, a baseless sense of dread that I dismissed as a product of my own suggestion. Inside the habitat, sealed away from the silent coast, I found the mission addendum. It was a single, laminated card, tucked into a wax-sealed envelope labeled Addendum 4B, Mandatory Environmental and Personal Conduct Protocols, Isla Perdita. I chuckled to myself, expecting a list of corporate platitudes about environmental stewardship and safety regulations. My amusement faded as I began to read. The protocols were specific, nonsensical, and carried the cold, implicit weight of a threat. They were not suggestions, they were rules. Protocol EP01 scene. All field survey activities must cease at 1700 local time. All personnel must be secured within the habitat module between 17:30 and 60:00. A compliance notee non-negotiable. The habitat's outer seals are time-locked during this period. Protocol EP02. Do not consume any native flora or fauna. Water must be sourced only from atmospheric reclamation unit. La compliance note. Risk of unknown biological contaminants and neurotoxins. Protocol EP03E at dusk. The forest floor may exhibit widespread bioluminescence. Do not approach or attempt to sample glowing fungal bodies. Maintain a minimum distance of 10 meters. Compliance note: ocular and dermal exposure risk unquantified. Protocol EP04. If you observe a stationary, tall, pale figure among the trees, the observer, do not approach. Do not make direct eye contact. Avert your gaze and return to the habitat module immediately. Compliance note. Do not log visual contact in the primary mission log. Use supplementary personal log only. Protocol EP05. If you hear a singing or whispering voice on the wind, activate the habitat's external sonic dampeners. Freak. 19 Aziv and remain inside for 1 hour. Compliance note: do not attempt to record the audio. This is a known atmospheric phenomenon. Protocol EP06C. All waste material must be incinerated on site. Any biological samples must be stored in the provided triple, sealed cryo containers. Compliance No T. Prevent cross-contamination of the unique ecosystem. I read the list 3 times. My scientific mind scrambled to impose order on the chaos. EPZO 2 and EPZO 6 were logical containment procedures, standard for a pristine ecosystem. But the others, they were the stuff of campfire stories, not corporate directives. The Observer. The instruction not to log sightings in the official record. And most chillingly, EP05. The specific mention of 19HC. This wasn't a random frequency. It was the precise frequency identified in scientific studies as capable of inducing visual and auditory hallucinations, feelings of intense fear, paranoia, and a sense of a presence. The implication was staggering. Athoward Geomatics, my rational, data-driven employer, knew about this atmospheric phenomenon. They knew it was capable of causing profound psychological distress, and they had engineered a specific countermeasure for it. The rule wasn't to protect me from the island. It was to protect the mission's integrity from my own compromised perceptions. The cold knot of apprehension in my stomach tightened. This wasn't just a survey. I was a lab rat, and the maze was an entire island. The first test came sooner than I expected. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in lurid shades of orange and purple, I was inside the habitat, collating my initial atmospheric readings. That's when I heard it. A faint, melodic sound carried on the wind. It was a voice singing a tune with no discernible words, both beautiful and deeply unsettling. My mind, the mind of Dr. Aris Thorne, immediately supplied a rational explanation. It was the wind, whistling through the island's strange, porous rock formations, creating an aeolian harp effect. It was a trick of acoustics. But the sound was too structured, the melody too deliberate. And with it came a wave of pure, irrational anxiety. A throbbing headache could be built behind my eyes, and the pressure in my ears intensified. The feeling of being watched was no longer a vague sense of unease, it was a certainty. I felt a primal urge to flee, to hide, even though I was already sealed inside a reinforced habitat module. I looked at the console, at the button for the sonic dampeners. My professionalism, my entire identity as a man of science, rebelled against the act. To press that button was to admit that the rules were real, that there was something out there beyond the scope, my instruments and understanding. It was an admission of fear, but the singing grew louder, the melody weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts, and the headache was becoming unbearable. My hand trembled as I reached out and activated the system. A low, almost sub-audible thrum filled the habitat, the 19S counter frequency. The singing on the wind didn't stop, but it was as if a pane of thick glass had been lowered between it and me. The headache receded almost instantly. The crushing anxiety lessened, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fear. The silence that returned was no longer peaceful. It was watchful. I had followed the rule. I had passed the first test. I spent the rest of the night staring out of the habitat's reinforced polycarbonate window into the encroaching darkness. the strange, metallic sweet scent of the air, somehow seeping through the seals. I was a scientist, sent to survey an island. But I was beginning to understand that the island, and the corporation that sent me here, was also surveying me, and I had no idea what would happen if I failed. The first week on Isla Perdida passed in a haze of disciplined routine and simmering paranoia. Each morning, I would rise before the OR's 600 unlock, my body already humming with a low, great anxiety that had become my new baseline. I would force down a nutrient paste, run a full diagnostic on my equipment, and step out of the habitat module the second the seals hissed open. My world was one of data, and I clung to it, like a castaway to a piece of driftwood. The numbers were my shield against the island's oppressive, watchful silence. My days were spent in methodical transects, pushing deeper into the island's interior. I was a ghost in this alien landscape, my presence marked only by the precise grid of sample points and GPS markers I left in my wake. The island's ecology continued to defy easy categorization. I logged species of flora that had no business growing in this climate, their adaptations suggesting a geological and evolutionary history that was a scientific impossibility. I found more of the divaricate shrubs, their tangled, defensive branches a constant, nagging question. One afternoon, while taking a soil core sample near a dense thicket, I found them fossilized tracks, pressed deep into what was now stone. They were tridactyl, clearly avian, but the scale was monstrous. Each print was the size of my torso. Mo were giants, but this was something else entirely. A defense against a ghost, I had thought. Now I had proof the ghost was real. My lidar drone became my primary tool, its laser pulses painting a three-dimensional map of the island with unerring accuracy. The data it sent back was pristine, a cartographer's dream. But as I stitched the point clouds together, anomalies began to appear. Fleeting shadows in the data, non-geological and inconsistent, that seemed to shift between scans. I ran the error correction software 3 times, but the artifacts remained. I logged it as a persistent sensor glitch, a magnetic interference from the island's iron-rich volcanic rock. It was a logical explanation, but it didn't feel true. My own mind, the objective, analytical mind of Dr. Eris Thorne, was becoming an unreliable narrator. I adhered to the rules with the fanaticism of a zealot. Every survey ended at 1700 sharp. I was back inside the habitat. Seals locked by 1730. I drank only the reed water from the atmospheric unit, ate only my pre-packaged rations. The rules were my new religion, and fear was its sacrament. But faith is tested. And my first true test since the singing came on the 8th day. As the sun began its descent, I was making my way back to the habitat when the forest floor began to change. It started as a faint, ethereal glimmer, a smattering of pale green light on the damp earth. Within minutes, the entire forest understory was alight. It was bioluminescence, but on a scale I had never imagined possible. Vast, interconnected networks of mycelium pulsed with a soft, sickly, yellow-green glow, tracing intricate patterns across the ground like a circuit board designed by a mad god. The light was hypnotic, a silent, cold fire that painted the swollen, pale tree trunks in grotesque relief, making them look like the bones of some colossal skeleton. My scientific curiosity warred with the primal fear that now lived in my gut. I had a spectrometer in my kit. I could have taken a sample, analyzed its composition, quantified the phenomenon. It was my job, my very purpose for being there. I took a half step forward, my hand reaching for my pack. Protocol EP-03 at dusk. The forest floor may exhibit widespread bioluminescence. Do not approach or attempt to sample glowing fungal bodies. Maintain a minimum distance of 10 meters. The words from the laminated card flashed in my mind, cold and absolute. I froze, my breath catching in my chest. As I watched, the light seemed to intensify, the pulsing rhythm quickening, as if it were aware of my presence, my temptation. It felt like a lure. I stumbled backward, turning my back on the most extraordinary natural discovery of my career, and fled to the sterile safety of the habitat. The automatic locks sealing behind me sounded like a judgment. That night, sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a feverish landscape of glowing forests and impossible, giant birds. I woke up drenched in sweat, the 19s hum of phantom pressure in my ears. I sat at my workstation, trying to lose myself in data analysis, but my eyes kept drifting to the reinforced window. And then I saw it. At the edge of the tree line, just beyond the sterile cone of the habitat's exterior lights, stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly so, and bone pale. In the moonlight, it was utterly motionless, a sliver of wrongness against the backdrop of the tangled woods. I couldn't discern any features. No face, no clothes. Just a humanoid shape stretched beyond its natural proportions. My mind screamed, observe, document, photograph, quantify. This was a discovery that would change the foundations of biology, of everything. Protocol EP-04 scene. If you observe a stationary, tall, pale figure among the trees, the observer, do not approach. Do not make direct eye contact. Avert your gaze and return to the habitat module immediately. The rule. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command born of a knowledge I didn't possess. I felt a physical pull to keep looking, a desperate need to understand what I was seeing. But the memory of the singing voice, the crushing anxiety, the glowing forest, it was all part of the same terrifying tapestry. With a surge of will that felt like tearing muscle, I wrenched my gaze away from the window. My heart hammered against my ribs, and a wave of vertigo washed over me. I had seen it. The observer was real. I stumbled over to my personal data pad, my fingers trembling over the keys. The rule was explicit. Do not log visual contact in the primary mission log. Use supplementary personal log only. The secrecy was the most terrifying part. Aethord, my employers, knew. They knew, and they didn't want a record. I typed a single, Stark entry 2317. Visual contact. EP-04. Complied. The following days eroded what was left of my scientific detachment. The island was no longer a subject of study. It was a sentient entity, and I was an intruder. I began to feel the infrasound hum constantly, a low thrum of dread that vibrated in my bones. I started talking to myself, my own voice a frail counterpoint to the island's profound silence. The rules became my obsession. I would read the laminated card over and over, searching for some hidden cipher, some key that would unlock the logic behind the madness. Were the rules a form of protection or a form of control? Were they meant to keep me safe or to keep me compliant in some grand, horrifying experiment? One night, unable to sleep, a new thought seized me. I had analyzed the island's flora, its water, its atmosphere. But I had never analyzed the tools of my own containment. I took out the laminated card, the list of rules that now govern my existence. Under the high-powered lens of my digital microscope, I examined the ink. I expected to see the uniform, synthetic polymers of modern printing. Instead, I saw a chaotic, organic matrix. Cellular structures. With trembling hands, I scraped a microscopic sample of the black ink onto a slide. My portable chemical analyzer whirred, its sensors breaking the substance down into its core components. The base was simple: archaic iron gal ink, a medieval concoction of iron salts and tannic acid. But it was bound with something else. A complex protein. A protein my system couldn't identify. On a desperate, wild hunch, I pulled up the DNA analysis from one of the strange, leathery, leaved plants I had sampled on my third day. I ran a cross comparison. The analyzer chirped. Partial match found. The blood drained from my face. The ink wasn't from Aethelred. It hadn't been printed in some sterile corporate facility. It had been made here. The card wasn't a mission directive from my employer. It was a warning, crafted from the very substance of the island itself. My eyes fell on the last two rules. Protocol EP06A. All waste material must be incinerated on site. Any biological samples must be stored in the provided sealed cryo containers. I had followed them without question, assuming they were standard protocols to prevent contamination of the island's pristine ecosystem. But now, a more horrifying interpretation bloomed in my mind. It wasn't about protecting the island from me. It was about protecting the outside world from the island. It was about containment. I looked at the row of gleaming cryo containers filled with the impossible evidence I had so diligently collected. I looked at the squat, efficient incinerator in the corner of the habitat. Then I looked at the satellite uplink, my only lifeline, my only path for the data to escape. The rules were not for my survival. They were for my imprisonment. And in that moment, I understood the final, unwritten rule, the one that underpinned all the others, with a clarity that was more terrifying than any observer in the trees. Nothing leaves. The revelation about the ink shattered my world. The laminated card, my Bible of survival, was no longer a set of instructions from my employer. It was a ransom note from my jailer. My habitat module, once a bastion of science and safety, now felt like a well-appointed cell on death row. The satellite uplink, my sole connection to the world I once knew, pulsed with a malevolent promise, a gateway for my data, but a trigger for my damnation. The final, unwritten rule echoed in the silent hum of the electronics. Nothing leaves. My scientific discipline, the bedrock of my identity, fractured. I was Dr. Eris Thorne, a man who dealt in quantifiable facts. But I was trapped in a place that operated on a logic of its own. a logic of predatory, sentient rules. The isolation began to eat at me, in a way it never had before. It wasn't just loneliness, it was a profound, existential erosion. I found myself talking to the humming machinery, my voice a thin, reedy sound in the oppressive quiet. My logs, once crisp and objective, became rambling, paranoid entries, a dialogue with my own decaying sanity. I would read my own data, searching for glitches, for evidence of my own compromised perception. Was the infrasound making me see things? Or was the island simply showing me its true face? A new, defiant anger began to smolder beneath my fear. I was not just a victim. I was a collaborator. By following the rules, by dutifully collecting data that would never see the light of day, I was helping Eatharid maintain this prison. I was baiting the trap for the next scientist they would inevitably send. The thought was intolerable. I had to break the cycle. I had to break the rules. My rebellion began small. I stayed outside 5 minutes, past the 1700 curfew, my heart hammering against my ribs. With every tick of my chronometer, nothing happened. The next day, 10 minutes. The silence felt heavier, more charged, but still no overt response. Emboldened, I decided to challenge a core tenet, Protocol EPO5. I would record the singing. As dusk blotted across the sky, I set up a high-fidelity microphone outside the habitat, linked to my main console. And right on cue, it began. The ethereal, wordless melody drifted from the trees. I hit record. For a moment, there was only the pure, haunting sound. Then, my equipment screamed. A wave of static erupted from my speakers, so violent it blew the cones. The lights in the habitat flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. The 19s hum of the sonic dampeners kicked in automatically, a frantic, throbbing pulse that felt less like a shield and more like a cage rattling. When the emergency lights restored themselves a minute later, I looked at the recording file. It was corrupted beyond recovery. The island was not just a passive entity, it was a trickster, a malevolent intelligence that would not allow its secrets to be stolen. The island's response escalated. The next morning, lying on the doorstep of the habitat, was a single, enormous feather, iridescent black and impossibly large, like one from the fossilized tracks I had found. It was a message, a warning. The observer was no longer a distant figure at the edge of the woods. I would catch glimpses of it closer now, a pale flicker of movement between the swollen, water-hoarding trees, always just at the edge of my vision. It was a constant, unnerving presence, the physical manifestation of the island's will. My defiance hardened into a plan. I would not be another footnote in Eatharid's classified files. I would not be another ghost on this cursed island. I would send everything. My logs, the LiDAR data showing the impossible, shifting shadows, the chemical breakdown of the ink, the audio file of the static scream, the high-resolution photo of the feather, and my own testimony. A final, desperate warning to the world. I spent 2 days preparing the data packet, compressing it, encrypting it, my fingers flying across the console in a fever of purpose. This was my last act of science, my last act of defiance. On the final night, I sealed the habitat and bypassed. the internal safeties on the satellite uplink. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against the low, ever-present hum of the island. I initiated the transmission. A progress bar appeared on the screen, 1%. The lights flickered, 2%. A low groan echoed from the metal walls of the habitat, 3%. The singing began, not from outside, but from everywhere at once. A chorus of disembodied voices inside my own skull. The pressure in my ears was immense, my vision blurring at the edges. I looked out the window. The bioluminescent forest was pulsing in a furious, strobing rhythm, a sickly green heartbeat of pure rage. And there, pressed against the reinforced polycarbonate, was the observer. No longer a distant shape, but a defined horror. A long, pale, featureless face stared into the habitat, into me. There was no malice in its non-expression, only a profound, ancient stillness. It raised a long, white hand and touched the window. A spiderweb of cracks spread across the pane. The progress bar hit 5%. The power failed completely. The emergency lights sputtered and died, leaving me in absolute darkness, save for the hellish green glow of the forest and the pale, looming face at the window. The satellite console went silent. The transmission had failed. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark. Time had lost its meaning. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. I picked up my personal datapad, its battery power a final, fleeting comfort. My hands, once trembling, were now perfectly steady. I began to type. My final log. Log entry final. Dr. Aristhorn. Mission terminated. The transmission failed. The primary hypothesis was incorrect. The rules are not for containment. They are for integration. The island doesn't want to be kept in. It wants to be understood. It chooses its surveyors. It tests them. It breaks them. And then it remakes them. My skin feels thin. The air no longer smells of ozone and rot. It smells of damp earth and chlorophyll. The hum is no longer a pressure in my ears. It is my own pulse. I feel a profound stillness settling into my bones. A desire to stand at the edge of the trees and simply watch. To observe. To wait for the next variable to be introduced to the experiment. I see now. The data was never meant to leave. The surveyor is the message. Work here is not over. It is just beginning. A new protocol is required. Protocol EP07I. Do not attempt to transmit data. The observer will ensure compliance.